Midnight light on a dim-lit screen, clicking through stories you wouldn't believe. Cold case trails and courtroom scenes, whispers from the grave and media dreams. Truth is stranger, hearts beat faster, in the shadows of a news disaster. Scrolling deep where secrets hide, you found the stories time won't deny. Headstones and headlines, the tales collide. Justice and mystery, side by side. From backwoods clubs to breaking news lines, you shine a light where the silence lies. Oh, headstones and headlines, you dig where the truth won't die. Small town rumors and urban fear, a voice for the lost who can't speak here. Through every name, through every case, you hold the truth in a steady place. Cameras roll but justice lingers, truth unravels through careful fingers. You tell the story, speak their names in a world that's quick to look away. Headstones and headlines, the tales collide. Justice and mystery, side by side. From backwoods crimes to great night trials, you trace the echoes through every mile. Oh, headstones and headlines, you dig where the truth won't die. Some run from the dark, you walk right in with a question and a camera lens. It's not just a crime, it's the lives they led. The voice is still talking from the books unread. Headstones and headlines, the veil is thin. Truth gets louder when you begin. With every view, with every line, you bring the forgotten back to life. Oh, headstones and headlines, you dig where the truth won't die. Yeah, headstones and headlines, you tell the stories that time can't hide.
Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. I hope everyone had a nice day so far. My day was good. Today the humidity was much less and it was much less hot today. So I got out to do some yard work, although now I have sinus issues, including a sinus migraine that is trying to creep in, but so far it has not. So yesterday, for those of you who were here, we read chapter 1 and 2 of The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F-U-C-K. Today, we are going to read chapter 3 and 4. Chapter 4 is a little bit longer than chapter 2 was yesterday. So I'm going to try to get through the whole thing just so that we can keep it consistent with having 2 chapters each. But towards the end of yesterday, my throat was starting to ache a little bit. So we'll get as far as we can today. So I see Lunatic in the chat. Thanks for being here. Shaylee, good to see you. Long time no see. I hope you've been well. PCG is in the bushes. Thanks for being here. And Summer, thanks for being here, listening at work. Good to see you. All right, so we're going to get right into this. As I had mentioned yesterday, the chapters are broken up into sections. So chapter 3 is called You Are Not Special. And the three sections are Things Fall Apart, The Tyranny of Exceptionalism, and but if I'm not going to be special or extraordinary, what's the point? All right, so chapter 3. I once knew a guy. We'll call him Jimmy. Jimmy always had various business ventures going. On any given day, if you asked him what he was doing, he'd rattle off the name of some firm he was consulting with, or he'd describe a promising medical app he was looking for angel investors to fund, or he'd talk about some charity event he was supposed to be the keynote speaker for, or how he had an idea for a more efficient type of gas pump that was going to make him billions. The guy was always rolling, always on, and if you gave him an inch of conversational daylight, he'd pulverize you about how world spinning his work was, how brilliant his latest ideas were, and he'd name drop so much it felt like you were talking to a tabloid reporter. Jimmy was all positivity all the time, always pushing himself, always working an angle, a real go-getter, whatever the fuck that means. The catch was that Jimmy was also a total deadbeat, all talk and no walk. Stoned a majority of the time and spending as much money in bars and fine restaurants as he did on his, quote, business ideas, Jimmy was a professional leech, living off his family's hard-won money by spinning them, as well as everybody else in the city, on false ideas of future tech glory. Sure, sometimes he'd put in some token effort or pick up the phone and cold call some bigwig and name drop until he ran out of names, but nothing ever actually happened. None of these ventures ever blossomed into anything. Yet the guy kept this up for years, living off girlfriends and more distant relatives well into his late 20s. And the most screwed up part was that Jimmy felt good about it. He had a delusional level of self-confidence. People who laughed at him or hung up on him were, in his mind, missing the opportunity of their lives. People who called him out on his bogus business ideas were too ignorant and inexperienced to understand his genius. People who pointed out his deadbeat lifestyle were jealous. They were haters who envied his success. Give me 1 second, everyone. One second. All right. And welcome in, Remy and Citizen. Good to see you. Okay, where did I leave off? Okay, I'm just going to read those last two sentences again. My eye started itching, and I had to go get a tissue. So people who called him out on his bogus business ideas were too ignorant and experienced to understand his genius. People who pointed out his deadbeat lifestyle were jealous. They were haters who envied his success. Jimmy did make some money, although it was usually through the sketchiest of means, like selling another person's business idea as his own, or finagling a loan from someone, or worse, talking someone into giving him equity in their startup. He actually occasionally talked people into paying him to do some public speaking. About what? I can't even imagine. The worst part was that Jimmy believed his own bullshit. His delusion was so bulletproof, it was honestly hard to get mad at him. It was actually kind of amazing. Sometime in the 1960s, developing high self-esteem, having positive thoughts and feelings about oneself, became all the rage in psychology. Research found that people who thought highly about themselves generally performed better and caused fewer problems. Many researchers and policymakers at the time came to believe that raising a population's self-esteem could lead to some tangible social benefits: lower crime, better academic records, greater employment, lower budget deficits. As a result, beginning in the next decade, the 1970s, self-esteem practices began to be taught to parents, emphasized by therapists, politicians, and teachers, and instituted into educational policy. Grade inflation, for example, was implemented to make low-achieving kids feel better about their lack of achievement. Participation awards and bogus trophies were invented for any number of mundane and expected activities. Kids were given inane homework assignments, like writing down all the reasons why they thought they were special, or the 5 things they liked most about themselves. Pastors and ministers told their congregations that they were each uniquely special in God's eyes and were destined to excel and not be average. Business and motivational seminars cropped up chanting the same paradoxical mantra: every single one of us can be exceptional and massively successful. But it's a generation later and the data is in. We are not all exceptional. It turns out that merely feeling good about yourself doesn't really mean anything unless you have a good reason to feel good about yourself. It turns out that adversity and failure are actually useful and even necessary for developing strong-minded and successful adults. It turns out that teaching people to believe they're exceptional and to feel good about themselves no matter what doesn't lead to a population full of Bill Gateses and Martin Luther Kings. It leads to a population full of Jimmys. Jimmy, the delusional startup founder, Jimmy, who smoked pot every day and had no real marketable skills other than talking himself up and believing it. Jimmy, the type of guy who yelled at his business partner for being immature, and then maxed out the company credit card at Les Bernardines trying to impress some Russian model. Jimmy, who was quickly running out of aunts and uncles who could loan him more money. Yes, that confident, high self-esteem Jimmy. The Jimmy who spent so much time talking about how good he was that he forgot to, actually do something. The problem with the self-esteem movement is that it measured self-esteem by how positively people felt about themselves. But a true and accurate measurement of one's self-worth is how people feel about the negative aspects of themselves. If a person like Jimmy feels absolutely fucking great 99.9% of the time, despite his life falling apart around him, then how can that be a valid metric for a successful and happy life? Jimmy is entitled. That is, he feels as though he deserves good things without actually earning them. He believes he should be able to be rich without actually working for it. He believes he should be liked and well connected without actually helping anyone. He believes he should have an amazing lifestyle without actually sacrificing anything. People like Jimmy become so fixated on feeling good about themselves that they manage to delude themselves into believing that they are accomplishing great things even when they're not. They believe they're the brilliant presenter on stage when actually they're making a fool of themselves. They believe they're the successful startup founder when in fact they've never had a successful venture. They call themselves life coaches and charge money to help others, even though they're only 25 years old and haven't actually accomplished anything substantial in their lives. Entitled people exude a delusional degree of self-confidence. This confidence can be alluring to others, at least for a little while. In some instances, the entitled person's delusional level of confidence can become contagious and help the people around the entitled person feel more confident in themselves too. Despite all of Jimmy's shenanigans, I have to admit that it was fun hanging out with him sometimes. You felt indestructible around him. But the problem with entitlement is that it makes people need to feel good about themselves all the time, even at the expense of those around them. And because entitled people always need to feel good about themselves, they end up spending most of their time thinking about themselves. After all, it takes a lot of energy and work to convince yourself that your shit doesn't stink, especially when you've actually been living in a toilet. Once people have developed the thought pattern to constantly construe what happens around them as self-aggrandizing, it's extremely hard to break them out of it. Any attempt to reason with them is seen as simply another threat to their superiority by another person who can't handle how smart, talented, good-looking, successful they are. Entitlement closes in upon itself in a kind of narcissistic bubble, distorting anything and everything in such a way as to reinforce itself. People who feel entitled view every occurrence in their life as either an affirmation of or a threat to their own greatness. If something good happens to them, it's because of some amazing feat they accomplished. If something bad happens to them, it's because somebody is jealous and trying to bring them down a notch. Entitlement is impervious. People who are entitled delude themselves into whatever feeds their sense of superiority. They keep their mental facade standing at all costs, even if it sometimes requires being physically or emotionally abusive to those around them. But entitlement is a failed strategy. It's just another high, but it's not happiness. The true measurement of self-worth is not how a person feels about her positive experiences, but rather how she feels about her negative experiences. A person like Jimmy hides from his problems by making up imagined successes for himself at every turn. And because he can't face his problems, no matter how good he feels about himself, he is weak. A person who actually has a high self-worth is able to look at the negative parts of his character frankly. Yes, sometimes I'm irresponsible with money. Yes, sometimes I exaggerate my own successes. Yes, I rely too much on others to support me and should be more self-reliant. And then acts to improve upon them. But entitled people, because they are incapable of acknowledging their own problems openly and honestly, are incapable of improving their lives in any lasting or meaningful way. They are left chasing high after high and accumulate greater and greater levels of denial. But eventually, reality must hit, and the underlying problems will once again make themselves clear. It's just a question of when and how painful it will be. So that was the first part. Jimmy. I feel like I know a lot of Jimmys in life. So thanks for coming in, B. Kaser. I hope the horses are good. I haven't seen you in a little bit. Queen Bella, thanks for being here. Oh, really, B. Kaser? You were listening to this book on audio earlier this month. It's a great book. I've had this since it came out, and I was looking. It's about 10 years old, and I'd only gotten through the first chapter, and so we had been talking about books a while ago, and I said, oh, we should do a book club, and then I never did. And we got talking about the Idaho 4 book, which did come in today. It did come in today. I got it. I thought that Walmart had to order it and I would get it in the mail, but it came with my delivery. So I was like, bonus. Camelot, thanks for being here. Yes, great book, brilliant. So far, I am liking it. And the anecdotes are definitely relatable. Definitely relatable. Hey, Marie, how are you? Yes, don't be a Jimmy. Don't be a Jimmy. Okay. All right. So the next section of this chapter, and again, the name of this chapter is You Are Not Special. Things fall apart. I sat in my 9 a.m. biology class, arms cradling my head on my desk as I stared at the clock secondhand, making laps, each tick syncopated with the teacher's dronings on about chromosomes and mitosis. Like most 13-year-olds stuck in a stuffy fluorescent classroom, I was bored. A knock came on the door. Mr. Price, the school's assistant principal, stuck his head in. Excuse me for interrupting. Mark, can you step outside with me for a moment? Oh, and bring your things with you. Strange, I thought. Kids get sent to the principal, but the principal rarely gets sent to them. I gathered my things and stepped out. The hallway was empty. Hundreds of beige lockers converged on the horizon. Mark, can you take me to your locker, please? Sure, I said, and slugged myself down the hall, baggy jeans and moppy hair and oversized Pantera t-shirt and all. We went to my locker. Open it, please, Mr. Price says. So I do. He steps in front of me and gathers my coat, my gym bag, my backpack, all of the locker's contents, minus a few notebooks and pencils. He starts walking away. Come with me, please. he says, without looking back. I start to get an uneasy feeling. I follow him to his office where he asks me to sit down. He closes the door and locks it. He goes over to the window and adjusts the blinds to block the view from outside. My palms begin to sweat. This is not a normal principal visit. Mr. Price sits down and quietly rummages through my things, checking pockets, unzipping zippers, shaking out my gym clothes, and placing them on the floor. Without looking up at me, Mr. Price asks, "Do you know what I'm looking for, Mark?" "No," I say. "Drugs." The word shocks me into nervous attention. Drugs?" I stammer. "What kind?" He looks at me sternly. "I don't know. What kind do you have?" He opens one of my binders and checks the small pocket meant for pens. My sweat blossoms like a fungal growth. It spreads from my palms to my arms and now my neck. My temples pulsate as blood floods my brain and face. Like most 13-year-olds freshly accused of possessing narcotics and bringing them to school, I want to run away and hide. "I don't know what you're talking about," I protest, the words sounding far meeker than I'd like. I feel as I should be sounding confident in myself right now. Or maybe not. Maybe I should be scared. Do liars sound more scared or confident? Because however they sound, I want to sound the opposite. Instead, my lack of confidence compounds, unconfidence about my sounding unconfident, making me more unconfident. That fucking feedback loop from hell. "We'll see about that," he says, turning his attention to my backpack, which seemingly has 100 pockets. Each is loaded with its own silly teen desiderata. Colored pens, old notes passed in class, early 90s CDs with cracked cases, dried up markers, an old sketch pad with half its pages missing, dust and lint and crap accumulated during a maddeningly I don't know. Why am I having a trouble with this word? Circuitous middle school existence. My sweat must be pumping at the speed of light because time extends itself and dilates such that what is mere seconds on that 9 a.m. second period biology clock now feels like the Paleolithic eons, and I'm growing up and dying every minute. Just me and Mr. Price in my bottomless backpack. Somewhere around the Mesolithic age, Mr. Price finishes searching the backpack. Having found nothing, he seems flustered. He turns the pack upside down and lets all of my crap crash onto his office floor. He's now sweating as profusely as I am, except in place of my terror, there is his anger. "No drugs today, eh?" He tries to sound casual. "Nope. So do I." He spreads my stuff out, separating each item and coagulating them into little piles beside my gym gear. My coat and backpack now lie empty and lifeless on his lap. He sighs and stares at the wall. Like most 13-year-olds locked in an office with a man angrily throwing their shit all over the floor, I want to cry. Mr. Price scans the contents organized on the floor. Nothing illicit or illegal, no narcotics, not even anything against school policy. He sighs and then throws the coat and backpack on the floor too. He bends over and puts his elbows on his knees, making his face level with mine. "Mark, I'm going to give you one last chance to be honest with me. If you are honest, this will turn out much better for you. If it turns out you're lying, then it's going to be much worse." As if on cue, I gulp. "Now tell me the truth," Mr. Price demands. "Did you bring drugs to school today?" Fighting back tears, screams clawing at my throat, I stare my tormentor in the face and in a pleading voice, dying to be relieved of its adolescent horrors, I say, "No, I don't have any drugs. I have no idea what you're talking about." "Okay," he says, signaling surrender. "I guess you can collect your things and go." He takes one last longing gaze at my deflated backpack, lying like a broken promise there on his office floor. He casually puts one foot down on the pack, stomping lightly, a last-ditch effort. I anxiously wait for him to get up and leave so I can get on with my life and forget this whole nightmare. But his foot stops on something. "What is this?" he asks, tapping with his foot. What is what? I say. There's still something in here. He picks up the bag and starts feeling around the bottom of it. For me, the room gets fuzzy. Everything goes wobbly. When I was young, I was smart. I was friendly. But I was also a shithead. I mean, that in the most loving way possible. I was rebellious. I was a rebellious, lying little shithead. Angry and full of resentment. When I was 12, I hacked my house's security system with refrigerator magnets so I could sneak out undetected in the middle of the night. My friend and I would put his mom's car in neutral and push it into the street so we could drive around without waking her up. I would write papers about abortion because I knew my English teacher was a hardcore conservative Christian. Another friend and I stole cigarettes from his mom and sold them to kids out behind the school. And I also caught a secret compartment into the bottom of my backpack to hide my marijuana. That was the same hidden compartment Mr. Price found after stepping on the drugs I was hiding. I had been lying. And as promised, Mr. Price didn't go easy on me. A few hours later, like most 13-year-olds handcuffed in the back of a police car, I thought my life was over. And I was kind of right in a way. My parents quarantined me at home. I was to have no friends for the foreseeable future. Having been expelled from school, I was to be homeschooled for the rest of the year. My mom made me get a haircut and threw out all of my Marilyn Manson and Metallica shirts, which for an adolescent in 1998 was tantamount to being sentenced to death by lameness. My dad dragged me into his office with him in the mornings and made me file papers for hours on end. Once homeschooling was over, I was enrolled in a small private Christian school where, and this may not surprise you, I didn't exactly fit in. And just when I had finally cleaned up my act and turned in my assignments and learned the value of good clerical responsibility, my parents decided to get divorced. I tell you all of this only to point out that my adolescence sucked donkey balls. I lost all of my friends, my community, my legal rights, and my family within the span of about 9 months. My therapist in my 20s would later call this some real traumatic shit. And I would spend the next decade and change working on unraveling it and becoming less of a self-absorbed, entitled little prick. The problem with my home life back then was not all of the horrible things that were said or done. Rather, it was all of the horrible things that needed to be said and done, but weren't. My family stonewalls the way Warren Buffett makes money or Jenna Jameson fucks. We're champions at it. The house could have been burning down around us, and it would have been met with, "Oh no, everything's fine. A tad warm in here perhaps, but really, everything's fine." When my parents got divorced, there were no broken dishes, no slammed doors, no screaming argument about who fucked whom. Once they had reassured my brother and me that it wasn't our fault, we had a Q&A session. Yes, you read that right. About the logistics of the new living arrangements. Not a tear was shed. Not a voice was raised. The closest peek my brother and I got into our parents' unraveling emotional lives was hearing, "Nobody cheated on anybody." Oh, that's nice. It was a tad warm in the room, but really, everything was fine. My parents are good people. I don't blame them for any of this. Not anymore, at least. And I love them very much. They have their own stories and their own journeys and their own problems, just as all parents do. And just as all of their parents do, and so on. And like all parents, my parents, with the best of intentions, imparted some of their problems to me, and I probably will to my kids. When real traumatic shit like this happens in our lives, we begin to unconsciously feel as though we have problems that we're incapable of ever solving. And this assumed inability to solve our problems causes us to feel miserable and helpless. But it also causes something else to happen. If we have problems that are unsolvable, our unconscious figures that were either uniquely special or uniquely defective in some way, that we're somehow unlike everyone else and that the rules must be different for us. Put simply, we become entitled. The pain from my adolescence led me down a road of entitlement that lasted through much of my early adulthood. Whereas Jimmy's entitlement played out in the business world, where he pretended to be a huge success, my entitlement played out in my relationships, particularly with women. My trauma had revolved around intimacy and acceptance, so I felt a constant need to overcompensate, to prove to myself that I was loved and accepted at all times. And as a result, I soon took to chasing women the same way a cocaine addict takes to a snowman made out of cocaine. I made sweet love to it and then promptly suffocated myself in it. I became a player, an immature, selfish, albeit sometimes charming player. And I strung up a long series of superficial and unhealthy relationships for the better part of a decade. It wasn't so much the sex I craved, although the sex was fun. It was the validation. I was wanted. I was loved. For the first time since I could remember, I was worthy. My craving for validation quickly fed into a mental habit of self-aggrandizing and overindulgence. I felt entitled to say or do whatever I wanted, to break people's trust, to ignore people's feelings, and then justify it later with shitty half-assed apologies. Well, this period certainly had its moments of fun and excitement, and I met some wonderful women. My life was more or less a wreck the whole time. I was often unemployed, living on friends' couches or with my mom, drinking way more than I should have been, alienating a number of friends, and when I did meet a woman I really liked, my self-absorption quickly torpedoed everything. The deeper the pain, the more helpless we feel against our problems, and the more entitlement we adopt to compensate for those problems. This entitlement plays out in one of two ways. 1, I'm awesome and the rest of you all suck, so I deserve special treatment. 2, I suck and the rest of you are all awesome, so I deserve special treatment. Opposite mindset on the outside, but the same selfish, creamy core in the middle. In fact, you will often see entitled people flip back and forth between the two. Either they're on top of the world, or the world is on top of them, depending on the day of the week, or how well they're doing with their particular addiction at that moment. Most people correctly identify a person like Jimmy as a raging narcissist asshat. That's because he's pretty blatant in his delusionally high self-regard. What most people don't correctly identify as entitlement are those people who perpetually feel as though they're inferior and unworthy of the world. Because construing everything in life so as to make yourself out to be consistently victimized requires just as much selfishness as the opposite. It takes just as much energy and delusional self-aggrandizement to maintain the belief that one has insurmountable problems as that one has no problems at all. The truth is, there's no such thing as a personal problem. If you've got a problem, chances are millions of other people have had it in the past, have it now, or are going to have it in the future. Likely people you know, too. That doesn't minimize the problem or mean that it shouldn't hurt. It doesn't mean you aren't legitimately a victim in some circumstances. It just means that you're not special. Often, this realization that you and your problems are actually not privileged in their severity or pain, that is the first and most important step towards solving them. But for some reason, it appears that more and more people, particularly young people, are forgetting this. Numerous professors and educators have noted a lack of emotional resilience and an excess of selfish demands in today's young people. It's not uncommon now for books to be removed from a class's curriculum for no other reason than that they made someone feel bad. Speakers and professors are shouted down and banned from campuses for infractions as simple as suggesting that maybe some Halloween costumes really aren't that offensive. School counselors note that more students than ever are exhibiting severe signs of emotional distress over what are otherwise run-of-the-mill daily college experiences, such as an argument with a roommate or getting a low grade in a class. It's strange that in an age when we are most connected than ever, entitlement seems to be at an all-time high. Something about recent technology seems to allow our insecurities to run amok like never before. The more freedom we're given to express ourselves, the more we want to be free of having to deal with anyone who may disagree with us or upset us. The more exposed we are to opposing viewpoints, the more we seem to get upset that those other viewpoints exist. The easier and more problem-free our lives become, the more we seem to feel entitled for them to get even better. The benefits of the internet and social media are unquestionably fantastic. In many ways, this is the best time in history to be alive. But perhaps these technologies are having some unintended social side effects. Perhaps these same technologies that have liberated and educated so many are simultaneously enabling people's sense of entitlement more than ever before. All right. That was actually, I really liked that section. What was the title of that again? That part, Things Fall Apart. Things Fall Apart. All right, give me 1 second. I need to go turn on a light. All right. Oh my gosh, you used to call your friend donkey balls. Oh my god, when he put I was looking ahead, and so before I even said it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But like this Mark Manson writes, there was another author I used to read in college. Oh my gosh, and I don't remember his name, but his stories were, he kind of has the same writing style. Let's see. Those would be fun to read. Yeah, I thought so too, Bella. It was a long section, but it was good. All right, so let's see. The next one is The Tyranny of Exceptionalism. Most of us are pretty average at most things we do. Even if you're exceptional at one thing, chances are you're average or below average at most other things. That's just the nature of life. To become truly great at something, you have to dedicate shit tons of time and energy to it. And because we all have limited time and energy, few of us ever become truly exceptional at more than one thing, if anything at all. We can then say that it's a statistical improbability that any single person will be an extraordinary performer in all areas of life, or even in many areas of their life. Brilliant business people are often fuck-ups in their personal lives. Extraordinary athletes are often shallow and as dumb as a lobotomized rock. Many celebrities are probably just as clueless about life as the people who gawk at them and follow their every move. We're all, for the most part, pretty average people. But it's the extremes that get all of the publicity. We kind of know this already, but we rarely think and or talk about it, and we certainly never discuss why this could be a problem. Having the internet, Google, Facebook, YouTube, and access to 500 plus channels of television is amazing, but our attention is limited. There's no way we can process the tidal waves of information flowing past us constantly. Therefore, the only zeros and ones that break through and catch our attention are the truly exceptional 99th percentile. All day, every day, we are flooded with the truly extraordinary, the best of the best, the worst of the worst, the greatest physical feats, the funniest jokes, the most upsetting news, the scariest threats, non-stop. Our lives today are filled with information from the extremes of the bell curve of human experience. Because in the media, business, that's what gets eyeballs, and eyeballs bring dollars. That's the bottom line. Yet the vast majority of life resides in the humdrum middle. The vast majority of life is unextraordinary, indeed quite average. This flood of extreme information has conditioned us to believe that exceptionalism is the new normal. And because we're all quite average most of the time, the delusion of exceptional information drives us to feel pretty damn insecure and desperate because clearly we are somehow not good enough. So more and more we feel the need to compensate through entitlement and addiction. We cope the only way we know how, either through self-aggrandizing or through other aggrandizing. Some of us do this by cooking up get-rich-quick schemes. Others do it by taking off across the world to save starving babies in Africa. Others do it by excelling in school and winning every award. Others do it by shooting up a school. Others do it by trying to have sex with anything that talks and breathes. This ties into the growing culture of entitlement that I talked about earlier. Millennials often get blamed for this cultural shift, but that's likely because millennials are the most plugged in and visible generation. In fact, the tendency toward entitlement is apparent across all of society, and I believe it's linked to mass media-driven exceptionalism. The problem is that the pervasiveness of technology and mass marketing is screwing up a lot of people's expectations for themselves. The inundation of the exceptional makes people feel worse about themselves and more self-assured to get noticed or even matter. When I was a young man, my insecurities around intimacy were exacerbated by all the ridiculous narratives of masculinity circulating throughout pop culture. And those same narratives are still circulating. To be a cool guy, you have to party like a rock star. To be respected, you have to be admired by women. Sex is the most valuable thing a man can attain, and it's worth sacrificing anything, including your own dignity, to get it. This constant stream of unrealistic media dogpiles onto our existing feelings of insecurity by overexposing us to the unrealistic standards we feel to live up to. Not only do we feel subjected to unsolvable problems, but we feel like losers because a simple Google search shows us thousands of people without those same problems. Technology has solved old economic problems by giving us new psychological problems. The internet has not just open-sourced information. It has also open-sourced insecurity, self-doubt, and shame. Hey, Bushi, am I cracking? Might have been. Or it was my voice. Some of these sentences are like super long. So I'm trying, I try to read ahead as I'm reading, but like some of the sentences and some of the words that he's using now, it's like self-aggrandizing. So that was interesting. And I think it's true. Like this, what was the title of this? The Tyranny of Exceptionalism. And I agree, like technology, there's filters and, okay, it's not my voice. So if it keeps doing it, let me know. I can always refresh. It's more connection. All right. Let me know. I can always refresh the browser. But like with filters and, other things like that, I just feel like it's true. Like you're always, comparing or, oh, look at how beautiful they are, how much money they have, or, I actually think the internet is great because, it has a lot of information. Like you can just do a Google search and have an answer to something. You don't have to go combing through encyclopedias or, read a ton of books. Okay, let me get a drink and then we'll finish up this last section. So the last section is, but if I'm not going to be special or extraordinary, what's the point? Hey, Green. It has become an accepted part of our culture today to believe that we are all destined to do something truly extraordinary. Celebrities say it, business tycoons say it, Politicians say it. Even Oprah says it, so it must be true. Each and every one of us can be extraordinary. We all deserve greatness. The fact that this statement is inherently contradictory, after all, if everyone were extraordinary, then by definition, no one would be extraordinary. Let me read that again, because that struck me. The fact that this statement is inherently contradictory, after all, if everyone were extraordinary, then by definition, no one would be extraordinary, is missed by most people. And instead of questioning what we actually deserve or don't deserve, we eat the message up and ask for more. Being average has become the new standard of failure. The worst thing you can be is in the middle of the pack, the middle of the bell curve. When a culture standard of success is to be extraordinary, it then becomes better to be at the extreme low end of the bell curve than to be in the middle, because at least there, you're still special and deserve attention. Many people choose this strategy to prove to everyone that they are the most miserable or the most depressed or the most victimized. A lot of people are afraid to accept mediocrity because they believe that if they accept it, they'll never achieve anything, never improve, and that their life won't matter. This sort of thinking is dangerous. Once you accept the premise that a life is worthwhile only if it is truly notable and great, then you basically accept the fact that most of the human population, including yourself, sucks and is worthless. And this mindset can quickly turn dangerous to both yourself and others. The rare people who do become truly exceptional at something do so not because they believe they're exceptional. On the contrary, they become amazing because they're obsessed with improvement. And that obsession with improvement stems from an unerring belief that they are in fact not that great at all. It's anti-entitlement. People who become great at something become great because they understand that they're not already great and that they could be so much better. I'm skipping. Okay, I am going to refresh my browser. I will be right back. All right, so I just refreshed my browser. Hopefully that will help. If it doesn't help, then we may have to end this because it's showing my internet is good, but I know I've noticed with other creators using StreamYard that they skip sometimes too. So let me know if this is better. If not, we can end it. But this chapter is actually almost done. Okay, so I'm gonna restart this section just because it was skipping. So this section again is called but if I'm not going to be special or extraordinary, what's the point? It has become an accepted part of our culture today to believe that we are all destined to do something truly extraordinary. Celebrities say it, business tycoons say it, politicians say it, even Oprah says it, so it must be true. Each and every one of us can be extraordinary. We all deserve greatness. The fact that the statement is inherently contradictory, after all, if everyone were extraordinary, then by definition, no one would be extraordinary, is missed by most people. We eat the message up and ask for more. Being average has become the new standard of failure. The worst thing you can be is in the middle of the pack, the middle of the bell curve. When a culture standard of success is to be extraordinary, it then becomes better to be at the extreme low end of the bell curve than to be in the middle, because at least there you're still special and deserve attention. Many people choose this strategy to prove to everyone that they are the most miserable or the most depressed or the most victimized. A lot of people are afraid to accept mediocrity because they believe that if they accept it, they'll never achieve anything, never improve, and that their life won't matter. This sort of thinking is dangerous. Once you accept the premise that a life is worthwhile only if it is truly notable and great, then you basically accept the fact that most of the human population, including yourself, sucks and is worthless. And this mindset can quickly turn dangerous to both yourself and others. The rare people who do become truly exceptional at something do so not because they believe they're exceptional. On the contrary, they become amazing because they're obsessed with improvement. And that obsession with improvement stems from an unerring belief that they are, in fact, not that great at all. It's anti-entitlement. People who become great at something become great because they understand that they're not already great. They are mediocre. They are average. And that they could be so much better. All of this, every person can be extraordinary and achieve greatness stuff, is basically just jerking off your ego. It's a message that tastes good going down, but in reality is nothing more than empty calories that make you emotionally fat and bloated, the proverbial Big Mac for your heart and your brain. The ticket to emotional health, like that to physical health, comes from eating your veggies. That is, accepting the bland and mundane truths of life. Truths such as your actions actually don't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. And the vast majority of your life will be boring and not noteworthy, and that's okay. This vegetable course will taste bad at first, very bad. You will avoid accepting it. But once ingested, your body will wake up feeling more potent and more alive. After all, that constant pressure to be something amazing, to be the next big thing, will be lifted off your back. The stress and anxiety of always feeling inadequate and constantly needing to prove yourself will dissipate. And the knowledge and acceptance of your own mundane existence will actually free you to accomplish what you truly wish to accomplish, without judgment or lofty expectations. You will have a growing appreciation for life's basic experiences, the pleasures of simple friendship, creating something, helping a person in need, reading a good book, laughing with someone you care about. Sounds boring, doesn't it? That's because these things are ordinary. But maybe they're ordinary for a reason, because they are what actually matters. That was a really good chapter. Okay, Bella, you can still understand me. So is it better, or is it still skipping? Just let me know. And I do like, everyone can't be extraordinary, because then that means no one's extraordinary. Still a little. All right. What do we think? Do we want to keep going, or do we want to call it and just do but understandable? Okay. All right, let's just go. We'll go for maybe. I'll try to do this. This chapter is very long, so I don't know if I'm going to get through the whole thing. But we'll go for maybe another 30 minutes. Okay, so chapter 4. I wonder if it's because. Well, no, because I have the book the same spot I did yesterday. I don't think it's the book where I have it sitting. So chapter 4 is titled "The Value of Suffering," and The sections include the self-awareness onion, rock star problems, shitty values, defining good and bad values. So, chapter 4, the value of suffering. In the closing months of 1944, after almost a decade of war, the tide was turning against Japan. Their economy was floundering, their military overstretched across half of Asia, and the territories they had won throughout the Pacific were now toppling like dominoes to U.S. forces. Defeat seemed inevitable. On December 26, 1944, Second Lieutenant Hiroru Onoda of the Japanese Imperial Army was deployed to the small island of Lubang in the Philippines. His orders were to slow the United States' progress as much as possible, to stand and fight as he and his commander knew it was essentially a suicide mission. In February 1945, the Americans arrived on Lubang and took the island with overwhelming force. Within days, most of the Japanese soldiers had either surrendered or been killed, but Onoda and 3 of his men managed to hide in the jungle. From there, they began a guerrilla warfare campaign against the U.S. forces and the local population, attacking supply lines, shooting at stray soldiers, and interfering with the American forces in any way that they could. That August, half a year later, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered, and the deadliest war in human history came to its dramatic conclusion. However, thousands of Japanese soldiers were still scattered among the Pacific Isles, and most, like Onoda, were hiding in the jungle, unaware that the war was over. These holdouts continued to fight and pillage as they had before. This was a real problem for rebuilding Eastern Asia after the war, and the governments agreed something must be done. The U.S. military, in conjunction with the Japanese government, dropped thousands of leaflets throughout the Pacific region, announcing that the war was over and it was time for everyone to go home. Onoda and his men, like many others, found and read those leaflets, but unlike most of the others, Onoda decided that they were fake, a trap set by the American forces to get the guerrilla fighters to show themselves. Onoda burned the leaflets, and he and his men stayed hidden and continued to fight. 5 years went by. The leaflets had stopped, and most of the American forces had long since gone home. The local population on Lubang attempted to return to their normal lives of farming and fishing. Yet there were Hiro Onoda and his merry men still shooting at the farmers, burning their crops, stealing their livestock, and murdering locals who wandered too far into the jungle. The Philippine government then took to drawing up new flyers and spreading them out across the jungle. Come out, they said. This war is over. You lost. But these too were ignored. In 1952, the Japanese government made one final effort to draw the last remaining soldiers out of hiding throughout the Pacific. This time, letters and pictures from the missing soldiers' families were airdropped, along with a personal note from the emperor himself. Once again, Onoda refused to believe that the information was real. Once again, he believed the airdrop to be a trick by the Americans. Once again, he and his men stood and continued to fight. Another few years went by, and the Philippine locals, sick of being terrorized, finally armed themselves and began firing back. By 1959, one of Onoda's companions had surrendered, and another had been killed. Then, a decade later, Onoda's last companion, a man called Kozuka, was killed in a shootout with the local police while he was burning rice fields, still waging war against the local population a full quarter century after the end of World War II. Onoda, having now spent more than half of his life in the jungles of Lubang, was all alone. In 1972, the news of Kozuka's death reached Japan and caused a stir. The Japanese people thought the last of their soldiers from the war had come home years earlier. The Japanese media began to wonder if Kozuka had still been on Lubang until 1972, then perhaps Onoda himself the last known Japanese holdout from World War II, might still be alive as well. That year, both the Japanese and Philippine government, second lieutenant, now part myth, part hero, and part ghost. They found nothing. As the months progressed, the story of Lieutenant Onoda morphed into something of an urban legend in Japan. The war hero who sounded too insane to actually exist. Many romanticized him. Others criticized him. Others thought he was the stuff of fairy tale, invented by those who still wanted to believe in a Japan that had disappeared long ago. It was around this time that a young man named Norio Suzuki first heard of Onoda. Suzuki was an adventurer, an explorer, and a bit of a hippie. Born after the war ended, he had dropped out of school and spent 4 years hitchhiking his way across Asia, the Middle East, and cells and under the stars. He volunteered on farms for food and donated blood to pay for places to stay. He was a free spirit and perhaps a little bit nuts. In 1972, Suzuki needed another adventure. He had returned to Japan after his travels and found the strict cultural norms and social hierarchy to be stifling. He hated school. He couldn't hold down a job. He wanted to be back on the road, back on his own again. For Suzuki, it was a new and worthy adventure for him to pursue. Suzuki believed that he would be the one who would find Onoda. Sure, search parties conducted by the Japanese, Philippine, and American governments had not been able to find Onoda. Local police forces had been scavenging the jungles for almost 30 years with no luck. Thousands of leaflets had been met with no response. But fuck it, this deadbeat college dropout hippie was going to be the one to find him. Unarmed and untrained for any sort of reconnaissance or tactical warfare, Suzuki traveled to Lubang and began wandering around the jungle all by himself. His strategy? Scream Onoda's name really loudly and tell him that the emperor was worried about him. He found Onoda in 4 days. Suzuki stayed with Onoda in the jungle for some time. Onoda had been alone by that point for over a year, and once found by Suzuki, he welcomed the companionship and was desperate to learn what had been happening in the outside world from a Japanese source he could trust. The two men became sort of kind of friends. Suzuki asked Onoda why he had stayed and continued to fight. Onoda said it was simple. He had been given the order to never surrender, so he stayed. For nearly 30 years, he had simply been following an order. Onoda then asked Suzuki why a hippie boy like himself came looking for him. Suzuki said that he'd left Japan in search of 3 things: Lieutenant Onoda, a panda bear, and the abominable snowman, in that order. The two men had been brought together under the most curious of circumstances. Two well-intentioned adventurers chasing false visions of glory, like a real-life Japanese Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, stuck together in the damp recesses of a Philippine jungle, both imagining themselves heroes, despite both being alone with nothing, doing nothing. Onoda had already, by then, given up most of his life to a phantom war. Suzuki would give up his too. Having already found Hiro Onoda and the panda bear, he would die a few years later in the Himalayas, still in search of the abominable snowman. Humans often choose to dedicate large portions of their lives to seemingly useless or destructive causes. On the surface, these causes make no sense. It's hard to imagine how Onoda could have been happy on that island for those 30 years, living off insects and rodents, sleeping in the dirt, murdering civilians decade after decade. Or why Suzuki trekked off to his own death with no money, no companions, and no purpose other than to chase an imaginary yeti. Yet later in his life, Onoda said he regretted nothing. He claimed that he was proud of his choices and his time on Lubang. He said that it had been an honor to devote a sizable portion of his life in service to a non-existent empire. Suzuki, had he survived, likely would have said something similar, that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do, that he regretted nothing. These men both chose how they wished to suffer. Hiro Onoda chose to suffer for loyalty to a dead empire. Suzuki chose to suffer for adventure, no matter how ill-advised. To both men, their suffering meant something. It fulfilled some greater cause. And because it meant something, they were able to endure it, or perhaps even enjoy it. If suffering is inevitable, if our problems in life are unavoidable, then the question we should be asking is not, how do I stop suffering, but why am I suffering? For what purpose? Hiro Onoda returned to Japan in 1974 and became a kind of celebrity in his home country. He was shuttled around from talk show to radio station. Politicians clamored to shake his hand. He published a book and was even offered a large sum of money by the government. But what he found when he returned to Japan horrified him. A consumerist, capitalist, superficial culture that had lost all of the traditions of honor and sacrifice upon which his generation had been raised. Onoda tried to use his sudden celebrity to espouse the values of old Japan, but he was tone deaf to this new society. He was seen more as a showpiece than as a serious cultural thinker, a Japanese man who had emerged from a time capsule for all to marvel at, like a relic in a museum. And in the irony of ironies, Onoda became far more depressed than he'd ever been in the jungle for all those years. At least in the jungle, his life had stood for something. It had meant something. That had made his suffering endurable, indeed even a little bit desirable. But back in Japan, in what he considered to be a vacuous nation full of hippies and loose women in Western clothing, he was confronted with the unavoidable truth that his fighting had meant nothing. The Japan he had lived and fought for no longer existed. And the weight of this realization pierced him in a way that no bullet ever had. Because his suffering had meant nothing, it suddenly became realized and true. 30 years wasted. And so, in 1980, Onoda packed up and moved to Brazil, where he remained until he died. That was an amazing story, actually. And so, puts things into perspective for sure, where, he didn't think, he thought things were tricks. He was living in the jungle. He was fighting for something. Like, he thought he was fighting for he was fighting for his country. And then when he returned, it was completely different. Hey, Nanny, how are you? I'm just going to rest my voice for a little bit. At least not read for a little bit. So the next section is the self-awareness onion, which sounds very interesting. So I think, let's see, how many pages are left in this chapter? 18 pages. So I think we'll read about the self-awareness onion, and then we will end today. I don't know. We'll see how far I can get. My throat, for some reason, my throat is like more irritated today. Oh, good. I'm glad you're doing good. Let's see. Is the skipping better? Hey, Gigi. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna put a mint in my mouth. Hopefully it won't make me suck my teeth too much. Yeah, Maria, I thought so. And I actually, I want to learn more about Hiru. His name is Hiru Onoda. Hiroo is the first name, and then the last name was Onoda. Hiru Onoda. And that's, and then I was thinking too, he went back to his country, and it was almost like, they said they kind of paraded him around as, he had said a relic in a museum. So kind of like a sideshow, more of something to look at than to actually appreciate, I guess. I think of like a circus. It's very sad, to spend all that time. All right. So the next section is the self-awareness onion. Self-awareness is like an onion. There are multiple layers to it, and the more you peel them back, the more likely you're going to start crying at inappropriate times. Let's say the first layer of the self-awareness onion is a simple understanding of one's emotions. This is when I feel happy. This makes me feel sad. This gives me hope. Unfortunately, there are many people who suck at even the most basic level of self-awareness. I know because I'm one of them. My wife and I sometimes have a fun back and forth that goes something like this. Her, what's wrong? Me, nothing's wrong, nothing at all. Her, no, something's wrong, tell me. Me, I'm fine, really. Her, are you sure? You look upset. Me, with nervous laughter. Really? No, I'm okay, seriously. 30 minutes later, me. And that's why I'm so fucking pissed off. He just acts as if I don't exist half the time. We all have emotional blind spots. Often, they have to do with the emotions that we were taught. Let me reread that. Often, they have to do with the emotions that we were taught were inappropriate growing up. It takes years of practice and effort to get good at identifying blind spots in ourselves and then expressing the affected emotions appropriately. But this task is hugely important and worth the effort. The second layer of the self-awareness onion is an ability to ask why we feel certain emotions. These why questions are difficult and often take months or even years to answer consistently and accurately. Most people need to go to some sort of therapist just to hear these questions asked for the first time. Audio is cracking again. And so those of you who were here when it was doing it before, is it still doing it the same or is it worse? Okay, so Bella says, I think it sounds better. But it's still cracking? It's so weird. It comes and goes. Does it make it difficult to follow? I feel like it would be... Okay, so Pookie says it was worse before. Bella says less than before. Okay, so it doesn't make it hard to follow. I don't know. I know it's been doing it to other creators too. It's frustrating, especially when you're paying good money for a service. Okay. All right, so we'll keep going. So we'll finish up this onion part and then we'll end. We all have emotional blind spots. Often they have to do with the emotions that we were taught were inappropriate growing up. It takes years of practice and effort to get good at identifying blind spots in ourselves and then expressing the affected emotions appropriately. But this task is hugely important and worth the effort. The second layer of the self-awareness onion is an ability to ask why we feel certain emotions. These why questions are difficult and often take months or even years to answer consistently and accurately. Most people need to go to some sort of therapist just to hear these questions asked for the first time. Such questions are important because they illuminate what we consider success or failure. Why do you feel angry? Is it because you failed to achieve some goal? Why do you feel lethargic and uninspired? Is it because you don't think you're good enough? This layer of questioning helps us understand the root cause of the emotions that overwhelm us. Once we understand that root cause, we can ideally do something to change it. But there's another even deeper level of self-awareness onion, and that one is full of fucking tears. The third level is our personal values. Why do I consider this to be success or failure? How am I choosing to measure myself? By what standard am I judging myself and everyone around me? This level, which takes constant questioning and effort, is incredibly difficult to reach. But it's the most important because our values determine the nature of our problems, and the nature of our problems determines the quality of our lives. Values underlie everything we are and do. If what we value is unhelpful, if what we consider success or failure is poorly chosen, then everything based upon those values, the thoughts, the emotions, the day-to-day feelings, will all be out of whack. Everything we think and feel about a situation ultimately comes back to how valuable we perceive it to be. Most people are horrible at answering these why questions accurately, and this prevents them from achieving a deeper knowledge of their own values. But then they turn around and lie about you behind your back to make themselves feel better. People may perceive that they feel lonely, but when they ask themselves why they feel lonely, they tend to come up with a way to blame others. Everyone else is mean, or no one is cool or smart enough to understand them, and thus they further avoid their problem instead of seeking to solve it. For many people, this passes as self-awareness, and yet, if they were able to go deeper and look at their underlying values, they would see that their original analysis was based on avoiding responsibility for their own problem rather than accurately identifying the problem. They would see that their decisions were based on chasing highs, not generating true happiness. Most self-help gurus ignore this deeper level of self-awareness as well. They take people who are miserable because they want to be rich and then give them all sorts of advice on how to make more money, all the while ignoring important value-based questions. Why do they feel such a need to be rich in the first place? How are they choosing to measure success or failure for themselves? Is it not perhaps some particular value that's the root cause of their unhappiness and not the fact that they don't drive a Bentley yet? Much of the advice out there operates at a shallow level of simply trying to make people feel good in the short term. Well, the real long-term problems never get solved. People's perceptions and feelings may change, but the underlying values and the metrics by which those values are assessed stay the same. This is not real progress. This is just another way to achieve more highs. Honest self-questioning is difficult. It requires asking yourself simple questions that are uncomfortable to answer. In fact, in my experience, the more uncomfortable the answer, the more likely it is to be true. Take a moment and think of something that's really bugging you. Now, ask yourself why it bugs you. chances are the answer will involve a failure of some sort. Then take that failure and ask why it seems true to you. What if that failure wasn't really a failure? What if you've been looking at it the wrong way? So let's take a moment. Everybody think about, so I'll read that again. Take a moment and think of something that's really bugging you. Then ask yourself, why does it bug you? Chances are the answer will involve a failure of some sort. Then take that failure and ask why it seems true to you. What if that failure really wasn't a failure? What if you've been looking at it the wrong way? Very interesting. Hey, Narcos, thanks for being here. And anyone else I may have missed, thanks for being here. Yeah, what if it was a lesson? I never thought about it that way. Yeah, I worry about everything too. I still worry about everything, Nanny. I try to let it go and just say, like I can only control what I can control, but I still worry about everything. All right, back to this. A recent example from my own life, not my life, Mark Manson's life, the author's life. It bugs me that my brother doesn't return my texts or emails. Why? Because it feels like he doesn't give a shit about me. Why does it seem true? Because if he wanted to have a relationship with me, he would take 10 seconds out of his day to interact with me. Why does his lack of relationship with you feel like a failure? Because we're brothers. We're supposed to have a good relationship. Two things are operating here: a value that I hold dear and a metric that I use to assess progress toward that value. My value: brothers are supposed to have a good relationship with one another. My metric: being in contact by phone or email. This is how I measure my success as a brother. By holding onto this metric, I make myself feel like a failure, which occasionally ruins my Saturday mornings. We could dig even deeper by repeating the process. Why are brothers supposed to have a good relationship? Because they're family, and family are supposed to be close. Why does that seem true? Because your family is supposed to matter to you more than anyone else. Why does that seem true? Because being close with your family is normal and healthy, and I don't have that. In this exchange, I'm clear about my underlying value, having a good relationship with my brother, but I'm still struggling with my metric. I've given it another name, closeness, but the metric hasn't really changed. I'm still judging myself as a brother based on frequency of contact and comparing myself using that metric against other people I know. Everyone else, or so it seems, has a close relationship with their family members, and I don't. So obviously there must be something wrong with me. But what if I'm choosing a poor metric for myself and my life? What else could be true that I'm not considering? Well, perhaps I don't need to be close to my brother to have that good relationship that I value. Perhaps there just needs to be some mutual respect, which there is. Or maybe mutual trust is what to look for, and it's there. Perhaps these metrics would be better assessment of brotherhood than how many text messages he and I exchange. This clearly makes sense. It feels true for me. But it still fucking hurts that my brother and I aren't close. And there's no positive way to spin it. There's no secret way to glorify myself through this knowledge. Sometimes brothers, even brothers who love each other, don't have close relationships. And that's fine. It is hard to accept at first, but that's fine. What is objectively true about your situation is not as important as how you come to see the situation, how you choose to measure it and value it. Problems may be inevitable, but the meaning of each problem is not. We get to control what our problems mean based on how we choose to think about them, the standard by which we choose to measure them. What was the name of that? The Self-Awareness Onion. So those are actually like interesting questions just to kind of like break down. And I noticed, like, as I was reading the second part where he kind of looked at it, he repeated the process. He kind of said the same thing. You're supposed to be close. You're supposed to matter. You're supposed to be close. All right. We're going to do one more section. Actually, because the next section is rock star problems. How long is it? And this one is actually, I think it'll be a little bit easier for me to... Okay, so we'll do... Oh, geez. But then the last one is only like a few pages. All right, we're going to try to get through this. We're going to try to get through this chapter. Rock star problems. In 1983, a talented young guitarist was kicked out of his band in the worst possible way. The band had just been signed to a record deal, and they were about to record their first album. But a couple days before recording began, the band showed the guitarist the door. No warning, no discussion, no dramatic blowout. They literally woke him up one day by handing him a bus ticket home. As he sat on the bus back to LA from New York, the guitarist kept asking himself, how did this happen? What did I do wrong? What will I do now? Record contracts didn't exactly fall out of the sky, especially for raucous, upstart metal bands. Had he missed his one and only shot? But by the time the bus hit LA, the guitarist had gotten over his self-pity and had vowed to start a new band. He decided that this new band would be so successful that his old band would forever regret their decision. He would become so famous that they would be subjected to decades of seeing him on TV, hearing him on the radio, seeing posters of him in the streets and pictures of him in magazines. They'd be flipping burgers somewhere, loading vans from their shitty club gigs, fat and drunk with their ugly wives, and he'd be rocking out in front of stadium crowds live on television. He'd bathe in the tears of his betrayers, each tear wiped dry by a crisp, clean $100 bill. And so the guitarist worked as if possessed by a musical demon. He spent months recruiting the best musicians he could find, far better musicians than his previous bandmates. He wrote dozens of songs and practiced religiously. His seething anger fueled by his ambition. Revenge became his muse. Within a couple years, his new band had signed a record deal of their own. And a year after that, their first record would go gold. The guitarist's name was Dave Mustaine, and the new band he formed was the legendary heavy metal band Megadeth. Megadeth would go on to sell over 25 million albums and tour the world many times over. Today, Mustaine is considered one of the most brilliant and influential musicians in the history of heavy metal music. Unfortunately, the band he was kicked out of was Metallica, which had sold over 180 million albums worldwide. Metallica is considered by many to be one of the greatest rock bands of all time. And because of this, in a rare intimate interview in 2003, a tearful Mustaine admitted that he couldn't help but still consider him a failure. Despite all that he had accomplished, in his mind, he would always be the guy who got kicked out of Metallica. Gosh, can you imagine? Like, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, okay, Megadeth, 25 million albums. Like, that's amazing. He did what he set out to do. And then you get to the next paragraph that says he was kicked out of Metallica, which sold 180 million albums. And so it's true, like you still compare, but they were both successful. Like, we are apes. We think we're all sophisticated with our toaster ovens and designer footwear, but we're just a bunch of finely ornamented apes. And because we are apes, we instinctually measure ourselves against others and vie for status. The question is not whether we evaluate ourselves against others. Rather, the question is by what standard do we measure ourselves? Dave Mustaine, whether he realized it or not, chose to measure himself by whether he was more successful and popular than Metallica. The experience of getting thrown out of his former band was so painful for him that he adopted success relative to Metallica as the metric by which to measure himself and his music career. Despite taking a horrible event in his life and making something more positive out of it, as Mustaine did with Megadeth, he chose to hold on to Metallica's success as his life-defining metric continued to hurt him decades later. Despite all the money and the fans and the accolades, he still considered himself a failure. Now, you and I may look at Dave Mustaine's situation and laugh. Here's this guy with millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of adoring fans, a career doing the thing he loves best, and still he's getting all weepy-eyed that his rock star buddies from 20 years ago are way more famous than he is. Give me 1 second. Okay, where did I leave off here? Here it is. This is because you and I have different values than Mustaine does, and we measure ourselves by different metrics. Our metrics are probably more like, I don't want to work for a job for a boss I hate, or I'd like to earn enough money to send my kid to a good school, or I'd be happy to not wake up in a drainage ditch. And by these metrics, Mustaine is wildly, unimaginably successful. But by his metrics, be more popular and successful than Metallica, he's a failure. Our values determine the metrics by which we measure ourselves and everyone else. Onoda's value of loyalty to the Japanese Empire is what sustained him on Lubang for almost 30 years. But this same value is also what made him miserable upon his return to Japan. Mustaine's metric of being better than Metallica likely helped him launch an incredible successful music career. But that same metric later tortured him in spite of his success. If you want to change how you see your problems, you have to change what you value and or how you measure failure success. As an example, let's look at another musician who got kicked out of another band. His story eerily echoes that of Dave Mustaine, although it happened 2 decades earlier. It was 1962, and there was a buzz around an up-and-coming band from Liverpool, England. This band had funny haircuts and an even funnier name, but their music was undeniably good, and the record industry was finally taking notice. There was John, the lead singer and songwriter, Paul, the boyish-faced romantic bass player, George, the rebellious lead guitar player, and then there was the drummer. He was considered the best looking of the bunch. The girls all went wild for him, and it was his face that began to appear in the magazines first. He was the most professional member of the group, too. He didn't do drugs. He had a steady girlfriend. There were even a few people in suits and ties who thought he should be the face of the band, not John or Paul. His name was Pete Best. And in 1962, after landing their first record contract, the other 3 members of the Beatles quietly got together and asked their manager, Brian Epstein, to fire him. Epstein agonized over the decision. He liked Pete, so he put it off, hoping the other 3 guys would change their minds. Months later, a mere 3 days before the recording of the first record began, Epstein finally called Best to his office. There, the manager unceremoniously told him to piss off and find another band. He gave no reason, no explanation, no condolences. Just told him that the other guys wanted him out of the group, so, best of luck. As a replacement, the band brought in some oddball named Ringo Starr. Ringo was older and had a big, funny nose. Ringo agreed to get the same ugly haircut as John, Paul, and George, and insisted on writing songs about octopuses and submarines. The other guy said, sure, fuck it, why not? Within 6 months of Best's firing, Beatlemania had erupted, making John, Paul, George, and Ringo arguably 4 of the most famous faces on the entire planet. Meanwhile, Best understandably fell into a deep depression and spent a lot of time doing what any Englishman will do if you give him a reason to: drink. The rest of the 60s were not kind to Pete Best. By 1965, he had sued 2 of the Beatles for slander, and all his other musical projects had failed horribly. In 1968, he attempted suicide, only to be talked out of it by his mother. His life was a wreck. Best didn't have the same redemptive story Dave Mustaine did. He never became a global superstar or made millions of dollars. Yet in many ways, Best ended up better off than Mustaine. In an interview in 1994, Best said, "I'm happier than I would have been with the Beatles." What the hell? Best explained that the circumstances of his getting kicked out of the Beatles ultimately led him to meet his wife. And then his marriage led him to having children. His values changed. He began to measure his life differently. Fame and glory would have been nice, sure, but he decided that what he already had was more important: a big and loving family, a stable marriage, a simple life. He even still got to play drums, touring Europe and recording albums well into the 2000s. So what was really lost? Just a lot of attention and adulation, whereas what was gained meant so much more to him. These stories suggest that some values and metrics are better than others. Some lead to good problems that are easily and regularly solved. Others lead to bad problems that are not easily and regularly solved. These are such good stories. What did Gigi say? So Nanny had said each one had their own journey to follow. That's the way life goes. Yeah. And Gigi said, I compete only with the woman I was years ago. She taught me a lot. It's a really good way to look at it. Oh, Nanny, you're glad I'm reading? Okay, so, oh yeah, we're going to finish this chapter. All right, next section, shitty values. There are a handful of common values that create really poor problems for people, problems that can hardly be solved. So let's go over some of them quickly. 1, pleasure. Pleasure is great, but it's a horrible value to prioritize your life around. Ask any drug addict how his pursuit of pleasure turned out. Ask an adulterer who shattered her family and lost her children whether pleasure ultimately made her happy. Ask a man who almost ate himself to death how pleasure helped him solve his problems. Pleasure is a false god. Research shows that people who focus their energy on superficial pleasures end up more anxious, more emotionally unstable, and more depressed. Pleasure is the most superficial form of life satisfaction, and therefore the easiest to obtain and the easiest to lose. And yet, pleasure is what's marketed to us 24/7. It's what we fixate on. It's what we use to numb and distract ourselves. But pleasure, while necessary in life, in certain doses, isn't by itself sufficient. Pleasure is not the cause of happiness. Rather, it is the effect. If you get the other stuff right, the other values and metrics, then pleasure will naturally occur as a byproduct. 2. Material success. Many people measure their self-worth based on how much money they make, or what kind of car they drive, or whether their front lawn is greener and prettier than the next door neighbors. Research shows that once one is able to provide for basic physical needs, food, shelter, and so on, the correlation between happiness and worldly success quickly approaches zero. So if you're starving and living in the street in the middle of India, an extra $10,000 a year would affect your happiness a lot. But if you're sitting pretty in the middle class in a developed country, an extra $10,000 per year won't affect anything much, meaning that you're killing yourself working overtime and weekends for basically nothing. The other issue with overvaluing material success is the danger of prioritizing it over other values, such as honesty, nonviolence, and compassion. When people measure themselves not by their behavior, but by the status symbols they're able to collect, then not only are they shallow, but they're probably assholes as well. 3. Always being right. Our brains are inefficient machines. We consistently make poor assumptions, misjudge probabilities, misremember facts, give in to cognitive biases, and make decisions based on our own emotional whims. As humans, we're wrong pretty much constantly. So if your metric for life success is to be right, well, you're going to have a difficult time rationaling all of the bullshit to yourself. The fact is, people who base their self-worth on being right about everything prevent themselves from learning from their mistakes. They lack the ability to take on new perspectives and empathize with others. They close themselves off to new and important information. It's far more helpful to assume that you're ignorant and don't know a whole lot. This keeps you unattached to superstitious or poorly informed beliefs and promotes a constant state of learning and growth. 4. Staying positive. Then there are those who measure their lives by the ability to be positive about, well, pretty much everything. Lost your job? Great! That's an opportunity to explore your passions. Husband cheated on you with your sister? Well, at least you're learning what you really mean to the people around you. Child dying of throat cancer? At least you don't have to pay for college anymore. Well, there is something to be said for staying on the sunny side of life. The truth is, sometimes life sucks, and the healthiest thing you can do is admit it. Denying negative emotions leads to experiencing deeper and more prolonged negative emotions and to emotional dysfunction. Constant positivity is a form of avoidance, not a valid solution to life's problems. Problems which, by the way, if you're choosing the right values and metrics, should be invigorating you and motivating you. It's simple, really. Things go wrong, people upset us, accidents happen. These things make us feel like shit, and that's fine. Negative emotions are a necessary component of emotional health. To deny that negativity is to perpetuate problems rather than solve them. The trick with negative emotions is to 1. Express them in a socially acceptable and healthy manner. 2. Express them in a way that aligns with your values. Simple example. A value of mine is nonviolence. Therefore, when I get mad at somebody, I express that anger, but I also make a point of not punching them in the face. Radical idea, I know. But the anger is not the problem. Anger is natural. Anger is a part of life. Anger is arguably quite healthy in many situations. Remember, emotions are just feedback. See, it's the punching people in the face that's the problem, not the anger. The anger is merely the messenger for my fist in your face. Don't blame the messenger. Blame my fist or your face. Oh, no. Oh boy. I want to read that paragraph again. See, it's the punching people in the face that's the problem, not the anger. The anger is merely the messenger for my fist in your face. Don't blame the messenger. Blame my fist. Or your face. When we force ourselves to stay positive at all times, we deny the existence of our life's problems. And when we deny our problems, we rob ourselves of the chance to solve them and generate happiness. Problems add a sense of meaning and importance to our life. Thus, to duck our problems is to lead a meaningless, even if supposedly pleasant, existence. In the long run, completing a marathon makes us happier than eating a chocolate cake. Raising a child makes us happier than beating a video game. Starting a small business with friends while struggling to make ends meet makes us happier than buying a new computer. These activities are stressful, arduous, and often unpleasant. They also require withstanding problem after problem. Yet they are some of the most meaningful moments and joyous things we'll ever do. They involve pain, struggle, even anger and despair. Yet once they're accomplished, we look back and get all misty-eyed telling our grandkids about them. As Freud once said, one day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. This is why these values, pleasure, material success, always being right, staying positive, are poor ideals for a person's life. Some of the greatest moments of one's life are not pleasant, not successful, not known, and not positive. The point is to nail down some good values and metrics, and pleasure and success will naturally emerge as the result. These things are side effects of good values. By themselves, they are empty highs. Defining good and bad values. Good values are 1, reality-based, 2, socially constructive, and 3, immediate and controllable. Bad values are 1, superstitious, 2, socially destructive, and 3, not immediate or controllable. Honesty is a good value because it's something you have complete control over. It reflects reality and it benefits others, even if it's sometimes unpleasant. Popularity, on the other hand, is a bad value. If that's your value, and if your metric is being the most popular guy or girl at the dance party, much of what happens will be out of your control. You don't know who else will be at the event, and you probably won't know who half those people are. Second, the value or metric isn't based on reality. You may feel popular or unpopular, when in fact you have no fucking clue what anybody else really thinks about you. Side note, as a rule, people who are terrified of what others thinks about them are actually terrified of all the shitty things they think about themselves being reflected back at them. Wow, that struck me. I'm going to read that again. You may feel popular or unpopular, when in fact you have no fucking clue what anybody else really thinks about you. Side note, as a rule, people who are terrified of what others think about them are actually terrified of all the shitty things they think about themselves being reflected back at them. Some examples of good, healthy values: honesty, innovation, vulnerability, standing up for oneself, standing up for others, self-respect, curiosity, charity, humility, creativity. Some examples of bad, unhealthy values: dominance through manipulation or violence, indiscriminate fucking, feeling good all the time, always being the center of attention, not being alone, being liked by everybody, being rich for the sake of being rich, sacrificing small animals to the pagan gods. You'll notice that good, healthy values are achieved internally. Something like creativity or humility can be experienced right now. You simply have to orient your mind in a certain way to experience it. These values are immediate and controllable and engage you with the world as it is rather than how you wish it were. Bad values are generally reliant on external events: flying in a private jet, being told you're right all the time, owning a house in the Bahamas, eating a cannoli while getting blown by 3 strippers. Bad values, while sometimes fun or pleasurable, lie outside of your control and often require socially destructive or superstitious means to achieve. Values are about prioritization. Everybody would love a good cannoli or a house in the Bahamas. The question is your priorities. What are the values that you prioritize above everything else and that therefore influence your decision making more than anything else? Hiro Onoda's highest value was complete loyalty and service to the Japanese Empire. This value, in case you couldn't tell from reading about him, stank worse than a rotten sushi roll. It created really shitty problems for Hiro. Namely, he got stuck on a remote island where he lived off bugs and worms for 30 years. Oh, and he felt compelled to murder innocent civilians too. So despite the fact that Hiro saw himself as a success, and despite the fact he lived up to his metrics, I think we can all agree that his life really sucked. None of us would trade shoes with him given the opportunity, nor would we commend his actions. Dave Mustaine achieved great fame and glory and felt like a failure anyway. This is because he adopted a crappy value based on some arbitrary comparison to the success of others. This value gave him awful problems such as, I need to sell 150 million more records, then everything will be great. And my next tour needs to be nothing but stadiums. Problems he thought he needed to solve in order to be happy. It's no surprise that he wasn't. On the contrary, Pete Best pulled the switcheroo. Despite being depressed and distraught by getting kicked out of the Beatles, as he grew older, he learned to reprioritize what he cared about and was able to measure his life in a new light. Because of this, Best grew into a happy and healthy old man with an easy life and great family, things that ironically the 4 Beatles would spend decades struggling to achieve or maintain. When we have poor values, that is, poor standards we set for ourselves and others, we are essentially giving fucks about the things that don't matter, things that in fact make our life worse. But when we choose better values, we are able to divert our fucks to something better, toward things that matter, things that improve the state of our well-being and that generate happiness, pleasure, and success as side effects. This, in a nutshell, is what self-improvement is really about. Prioritizing better values, choosing better things to give a fuck about. Because when you give better fucks, you get better problems. And when you get better problems, you get a better life. The rest of this book is dedicated to 5 counterintuitive values that I believe are the most beneficial values one can adopt. All follow the backwards law we talked about earlier, and that they're negative. All require confronting deeper problems rather than avoiding them through highs. These 5 values are both unconventional and uncomfortable, but to me, they are life-changing. The first, which we'll look at in the next chapter, is a radical form of responsibility. Taking responsibility for everything that occurs in your life, regardless of who's at fault. The second is uncertainty. The acknowledgement of your own ignorance and the cultivation of constant doubt in your own beliefs. The next, failure. The willingness to discover your own flaws and mistakes so that they may be improved upon. The fourth is rejection. The ability to both say and hear no, thus clearly defining what you will and will not accept in your life. The final value is the contemplation of one's own mortality. This one is crucial because paying vigilant attention to one's own death is perhaps the only thing capable of helping us keep all our other values in proper perspective. And that is the end of chapter 4. So much to think about. So much to think about. And I think those stories between Steve Mustaine and Pete Best were really impactful because, like with Pete, initially he was like, oh my God, if I had stayed in the Beatles, I would be famous and popular and da-da. But then as he got older, and I feel like, as we get older, we, we're more knowledgeable. He was like, if I had stayed in the Beatles, maybe I wouldn't have met my wife. Maybe I wouldn't have the kids that I have. I wouldn't have the life that I have. So that's where, I believe in the universe, that everything happens for a reason. We just might not know what it is at that time. But going forward and then looking in retrospect, oh, that's why that happened. So yeah, we will be back tomorrow to read chapter 5 and 6. So just to kind of give you a preview, you get to the right page. Really, Gigi? Funny thing, Gigi, I was thinking, because I really like reading, and I would love to do this. Like maybe once a month, just take a week away from, true crime and, some of the sad stuff going on, and just read a book, because then, I have so many, and actually I have a book so the next book, what is it? It is 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life. I was thinking about, as I was reading this, I'm like, what could the next book be that we read? And I was looking up at my bookshelf, and it's hot pink. The book is hot pink. And it's 51 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life. So maybe we'll go to that one, because it's kind of like, the subtle way of not giving a fuck, and then kind of how to, live a kick-ass life. But thanks, Gigi. I appreciate that. I was thinking, I'm like, maybe someone on YouTube will listen to me reading this book and be like, hey, she would be good at reading audiobooks. Maybe we'll hire her as a contractor to read audiobooks as a side gig. I mean, I would love to do that. I would love to do that. Okay, so chapter 5 is You Are Always Choosing. And the sections are the choice, the responsibility, fault fallacy, responding to tragedy, genetics and the hand we're dealt, victimhood chick, and there is no how. And chapter 6, you're wrong about everything, but so am I. And the sections are architects of our own beliefs, the dangers of pure certainty, Manson's law of avoidance, kill yourself. I don't know about that one. And how to be a little less certain of yourself. So that will be tomorrow. And then on Thursday, we will finish up the book. Chapter 7, 8, and 9 are relatively short. They are about the same. Those 3 chapters are about the same length of the chapters we did today. So we will be done with this by Thursday night. I love audiobooks. I would listen all the time. At my last job, I had over an hour commute to and from. So I was in the car for almost 2.5 hours a day. So I would get a lot of books read, so to speak. But thanks everybody for being here. I do appreciate it. I actually really like doing this. So I think that this is going to be a new thing. This will be a new thing. And we can, we'll do a book a month, or maybe more, depending on, what's going on. Pookie says, just call if you get in the mood to read your books out loud, Emmy. Yeah. And I think these types of books, although, and then I have so many books that I want to read, and I just haven't. Right now I'm trying to get through The Librarian of Auschwitz, and I read like a chapter, and then I get doing stuff, and it's going to take me forever to get through. So Dr. Phil book didn't have any naughty words this great. I listen, I still get things accomplished. Well, that's good. I'm glad. All right, y'all. No outro today because so I hope to see you all tomorrow. Thanks again, everyone, for being here. I do appreciate it. If you haven't hit the like button, please do so on your way out. If you have made it this far on the replay, #replay. And until next time, y'all, I will see you on the flip side.